Captain Jack Jouett Jr. His ride to save America was an amazing and an exciting feat. Hey everybody, this is Colonel Carson with Family Tree Nuts, and I'm at the historic Jack Jouett home here in southern Woodford County, Kentucky. So who is Captain Jack? Jack Jouett was born December the 7th, 1754 in Albemarle County, Virginia, and he wasn't of normal ancestry. His dad owned a tavern called the Swan that was quite a popular hangout spot during the Revolution. Jack's grandfather was a French Huguenot who moved to Virginia in the early 1700s. The family is descended from a Norman aristocratic family and descended from Matthew de Jouett, master of the horse to King Louis XIII. He took care of the king's horses. Jack's mother was Mourning Harris, who was descended from Sir William Harris, who signed the 3rd Virginia Charter and was knighted in 1611. She was also descended from William Claiborne, the first secretary of the Virginia colony. As you can see, he had some exceptional roots. And by the way, if you like these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that little bell so you get notifications as to when we post new videos. Now back to Captain Jack. Jack was a very large man, especially for the time. He was 6'4", 220 pounds. Jack was a captain in the 16th Regiment of Virginia Militia, and his father supplied meat to the militia. One of his brothers was killed at the Battle of Brandywine. This family was very involved in American independence. In the summer of 1781, Benedict Arnold, who we all know as the traitor, attacked Richmond. The government fled to Charlottesville, which was the home of Virginia Governor Thomas Jefferson. General Lord Cornwallis found out that the government leaders were there and sent Colonel Banestre Tarleton to ride to Charlottesville and capture them. You may remember Banestre Tarleton as that evil character that everybody hates from the movie The Patriot. Some of the men that were in danger were Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Nelson Jr., and Benjamin Harrison. Quite influential men of the time, which would have been detrimental to the American cause if they were captured. Tarleton's plan was to ride the last leg of his journey hard and fast to completely catch the leaders by surprise. It is said that Jack Jouett was asleep on the lawn of the Cuckoo Tavern in Louisa County, Virginia, and was awakened by the cavalry wearing white coats that was part of Tarleton's cavalry. What an image! A captain of the Virginia militia asleep on the lawn of a tavern. He must have been a Marine. Just kidding. Jack knew that the British must be headed to capture the government, and he knew that they did not have any defenses. Around 10 p.m., he leapt up and made the 40-mile ride from Louisa to Charlottesville. The British were on the main highway, so Jack had to take the rough back trails by light of the moon. He also had to go fast enough to outrun the British. Imagine that ride, dodging those trees and debris. At about 11:30 p.m., Colonel Tarleton stopped his men for a few hours to rest, and then they took back off again about 2 a.m. At Boswell's Tavern, Tarleton came across 13 supply wagons that were on their way to the Continental troops in South Carolina. Since he was traveling light, they couldn't keep the supplies, so he had them burned. By daybreak, Tarleton and his men arrived at Castle Hill, the home of Dr. Thomas Walker, the famous explorer who 31 years earlier in 1750 had explored Kentucky and built the first house in Kentucky. They also went to Belvoir, the home of Dr. Walker's son, John Walker, who was a member of the Continental Congress, and they captured him. The story says that Dr. Walker prepared Tarleton an elaborate breakfast, including alcohol to hopefully delay him further. Gives you a snapshot of the time, alcohol at breakfast. At about 4:30 a.m., Jouett arrived at Monticello, home of Thomas Jefferson, and woke them up to warn them. It is said that Thomas Jefferson was already awake and in his garden. Jefferson gave him a glass of fine Madeira, more morning booze, and then Jack rode 2 more miles to warn the town of Charlottesville. Jefferson sent his wife and daughters to his friend John Coles's plantation, 14 miles away, and then he had breakfast with the legislators before making plans to leave. He took 2 hours to gather his papers together. He kept checking the path with his telescope and continued to prepare. Jefferson finally saw the British on his lawn and made a quick escape to the woods. One story says that he had to hide in a log from the British. When Jack got to Charlottesville, he went into his father's Swan Tavern, where most of the legislators were staying. The legislature decided to meet up in 3 days, 35 miles away in Staunton. Most of them got away, but 7 were captured, including Daniel Boone. That's right, Daniel was part of the House of Delegates representing Boonesboro and happened to be back east at that time. Boone was held for 5 days, but then released because Tarleton's men didn't have the means to keep them. Once the men started to flee, Jack then helped General Edward Stevens escape. General Stevens had been injured at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, and he was recovering at the tavern. General Stevens was too injured to ride and began to fall behind. Now, Jack was dressed in ornate clothing, and the general was dressed in shabby clothes. The British thought that Jack was high-ranking and ignored Stevens, allowing him to get away. Jack outrode the British and escaped also. Captain Jack Jouett had succeeded. For his efforts, the legislature voted to give Jack 2 pistols and a sword. He finally received the pistols 2 years later, but the sword was reordered in 1804, and there is no record that he ever received it. The next year, in 1782, Jouett moved to Kentucky, where many Revolutionary War veterans were gifted land. It is said that on his way to Kentucky, he heard a woman's screams coming from a house. He rushed in and saw a woman being abused by her husband, so he knocked down the husband. The wife hit him so hard over the head with a pot that the bottom gave out and wrapped around his neck. He fled from the house but had to go 35 miles to find a blacksmith that could remove the pot from his neck. Jack was elected as a delegate for Lincoln County in the Virginia House of Delegates, along with Benjamin Logan. He served for 2 non-consecutive terms. He favored statehood for Kentucky at the Separation Convention in Danville in 1788. After statehood, he served in the Kentucky House of Representatives. He was said to be friends with both political sides, and both Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay. Jack was also a farmer that raised grain and livestock, and he owned slaves. In 1784, he married Sally Robards, and they had 12 children. The most notable child was Matthew. Jack said he only had enough money to educate one of his children, and Matthew was chosen. Matthew attended Transylvania University and became a lawyer. He enlisted in the Kentucky Volunteers for the War of 1812 and rose to the rank of captain. He was one of the few river raisin survivors. When Matthew returned to Lexington, he decided to paint portraits. Jack said he sent Matthew to college to make a gentleman out of him, and he has turned in to be nothing but a damn sign painter. Matthew eventually became a famous painter and painted portraits of Thomas Jefferson, George Rogers Clark, Henry Clay, and the Marquis de Lafayette. Matthew had a son named James Edward Fighting Jim Jouett, who became a rear admiral in the Navy. He was immortalized with the quote from Admiral Farragut, "Damn the torpedoes, 4 bells, Captain Drayton go ahead, Jouett full speed," which has been shortened to "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Fighting Jim is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. In 1797, Jack built this house. It has 5 rooms, 3 downstairs and 2 half-story bedrooms upstairs. It sits on Craig's Creek, which after a short distance empties into the Kentucky River. The house is in the boonies today, but when it was built, it was in the middle of everything. And it was one of the areas that were first settled in Kentucky. At some point, Jack moved to Owensville in Bath County, Kentucky, and he lived with his daughter and her family. He did have a farm south of Owensville that he called Woodford Farm, no doubt named for his Woodford County home where this house sits. Jack died on March 1st, 1822 at the Peeled Oak Farm and is buried in an unmarked grave. The location was lost until fairly recently, but most believe he's buried at Tanyard Graveyard, a known burial site for Revolutionary War veterans. It is also about 2 miles from his farm. Tanyard Graveyard is in a very rural area and is a typical cemetery in the middle of a field with a few headstones. Virginia has 2 schools named after Jack. And a brewing company in Charlottesville has one of its ales named 40 Mile in honor of Jack's epic 40-mile ride to save the government. Many historians say that his ride was much more important than Paul Revere's. But that's up to you to decide. It is an honor to tell the story of Captain Jack Jouett, whose daring ride could have saved America. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. So here we are at the Kentucky home of Captain Jack Jouett, the Paul Revere of the South, who may have very well saved America in the Revolutionary War. And remember, family tree nuts, let our nuts find the nuts in your family tree.